that if you tell a debate organizer that you are available at all these different times, that means that you could be available. That means that you are available and definitely want to judge at all these different times.
Yeah.
So I basically gave like my 2 days of availability. I was like thinking they'd pick a few between them, and it's like, oh no, just like judge all of these things. So I just basically judged for 14 hours.
That's unbelievable. Thank you for your service. Thank you very much for your service.
Yeah.
I am going to. Why is it just me online and just you? We got to change the view to gallery view. There we go. All right. I should put my cap on to make me look slightly more hipster.
There you go. There you go.
So yeah, we're here on the Solidarity House Morning Show again after a several week holiday hiatus. And I don't know if we're going to keep doing this or not, but this was a great excuse to get Lindsey Hanlon here on the live stream this morning. And Lindsey is a voice of all things political, cultural, and aesthetic here in Wyoming, and is a voice that we here at Solidarity House listen to constantly for guidance on all three of those areas of life. So thanks to Lindsey, I know how to think about comic books and Wyoming politics and fashion even, which, as you can see, I'm not taking any kind of advice on that. And Lindsey, you've got some new projects as well. I don't want to talk for you. Why don't you take a minute and tell us what you've been up to?
Sure. So I decided I had too much free time. And I have been blogging and doing a TikTok and just started a Patreon, all under the brand of the Feminist Lipstick, LIPSTIQUE, because I had to be extra. And it's basically a combination of a lot of my passions where I talk about makeup, I talk about politics, I talk about pop culture, and I kind of combine everything. So on my TikTok, you can see me put on my makeup while I talk about the rights of sex workers. On my blog, you can see me trying to make people guess which palette is $80 and which palette is $2, so that we can talk about the difference between wealth or the difference between cost and value when it comes to things in the capitalist system. So it's just kind of a combination of all of my passions.
That's great. Well, tell us about the Patreon. I know that it's new.
It is.
We love Patreon. I'm definitely going to go visit it today and subscribe myself. What sort of work are you featuring through the Patreon?
So on the Patreon, you get to help decide what I'm going to be talking about, which is actually really helpful to me because I'm pretty eclectic in my topic choices, and it helps to have someone else helping steer me. So the base level, you can help vote on what I'm doing. On the mid-tier level, you can kind of see my works in progress. So I have about 15 Google Docs where I have half-written scripts or blog posts. And you can kind of see the works in progress as they are created. And at the top tier, you actually get to see an entire makeup tutorial where I'm actually like doing the, like, now you use this brush, now you use this brush, but also talking about some random topic that I've chosen. So probably the first one is honestly going to be about the books that I've been reading, because I've been reading a lot of very interesting books lately, and I love chatting about books. And so I'll probably be doing book reviews while putting on my makeup and teaching other people how to do the same.
And this is all really good stuff that you've been producing anyway for a long time now.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's kind of cool about Patreon, one of the cool side effects I think of it, or it's a feature too, but that is that you really can sort of consolidate your work around this prioritizing what's most important, and have that link to direct communication with your fans, and your fan base is as eclectic as your work. I think I definitely constantly see different types of people clustered around your posts.
Well, thanks.
Why don't you give us the Patreon link as well, and we'll put it in the in our comments here on the Facebook feed.
Fantastic. It is patreon.com/thefeministlipstick.
The Feminist, is it L?
LIPSTIQUE.
There we go. I'm glad I asked. Patreon.com, the feminist lipstick.
Yes.
And we're sharing that right now,
Thank
that
you.
link. And we definitely encourage people, especially if you're listening in Wyoming. It's so important that voices that are outside of the box, I think, be part of what could be and hopefully will become a real network of grassroots media. And speaking of media, I wanted to put up a picture, a photo taken from yesterday's rally by Michael Como. And so I'm going to screen share this.
Perfect.
And this is just an amazing picture by Michael. He's at Michael CUMMO, at Michael CUMMO on Twitter, so you can subscribe there. Of course, he is a local photographer whose work is widely seen. So I'm gonna do that while I'm doing that. You did not end up actually going yesterday.
No.
And it was, the vibe, I guess, was really bad for anyone who doesn't want to die of COVID. But what were your kind of initial impressions of that while I share this photo?
Yeah. Well, so yeah, I was originally planning to go down, and I was actually going to be kind of cheeky, and I was going to pass out free masks. But I have a lot of underlying health conditions, and I decided that if there's any place in Wyoming that I am likely to get COVID, it is at a rally of anti-mask protesters.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up not going, but I honestly, like, looking at the pictures and looking at the live streams and looking at the recaps, I was pretty upset.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of, and that's why I called it a pro-COVID rally.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously there's some irony there, but it was my way of saying that kind of, this was such a weird, dissonant funhouse mirror, and not in a good way, funhouse mirror kind of articulation of values.
Yeah.
And that's why, to me, it was, a pro-COVID protest, and the civil disobedience being called for is to spread fucking COVID.
Yeah. No, it's one of the things that always kind of astounds me about the far right, and especially, the kind of everyday people who support a lot of parts of the far right, is that they get so close to the point. They get so very close to the thing that is actually wrong, and then they zoom past that to this whole other thing. So, like, it's normal and good to critique your government, and it's normal and good to critique, displays of power. Like, that's a good thing. Like, that's something that we as leftists encourage people to do. But then they take that and apply it specifically to the health orders that are keeping us alive. And they apply it specifically to, this idea that the only time that we should ever oppress someone's bodily autonomy is if they're having an abortion. Otherwise, we should let them do whatever they want. And so they get so very close to, honestly, some of the same points that we make, and they just go in like the bizarro world direction with them. And it's so frustrating that they get so close and then they do that. Because honestly, like, if you talked to almost anyone in this crowd, I would bet you, if you ask them, do you back the blue? Do you believe in the thin blue line? Are you pro-police? They would say yes.
So this is really interesting, though. I want to cut into this for a second, because some of the speakers, including elected officials, talked shit about the cops that were there, at the rally. And so they used anti-cop language. They used the sort of some of the harshest language that is sometimes used by protesters on other parts of the political spectrum in reference to police. And I think that this is such a great like, this is such an amazing, there's so much going on here. There's so much rich text here. And
Yeah.
I know that that sounds,
Oh,
like elitist kind of critiquey, kind of thing. But, I'm thinking about that in the
mhm,
context of also how policing in Wyoming is so political and is
mhm.
so politicized, not by the demand for police accountability, but by the
Yeah.
resistance to
Yeah.
police accountability. And
Yeah.
also how I have seen cops in Laramie without masks almost all the time.
Yeah.
Like, I have, like, the number of times I've seen cops without masks in public places, in restaurants,
Yeah.
outnumbers the times that I've seen them with masks, by a huge amount.
Yeah.
And so that is also part of the
Yeah.
picture. But then here are
Mhm.
these guys, these people, these speakers talking crap to the
Yeah.
cops who are there in riot gear, probably because or partial riot gear, special
Yeah.
riot gear, partially because some person lit a fucking car on fire the day before the
Yeah.
protest.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that gets into the cognitive dissonance of it too. And again, it's that very specialized thing, where they hate the cops just during this moment, right? They hate the cops just during this part. But I'm sure if we looked at, Scott Clem's Facebook, and I know if we looked at Anthony Bouchard's Facebook from this summer, because I've seen it, uh, there's all this rhetoric about how the protests are bad, and these cities where the BLM protests are happening are falling into anarchy because they don't understand what anarchy means, and all of these things. And again, that's all bad. Like, when all of that protesting is happening, it's very, very bad. But this is righteous. This is just. As Scott Clem said, this is worth taking the day off work for.
Right,
And
right, right.
and just that very selectively applied logic of it's only oppression when it's happening to us. It's only a bad thing when it's happening to us. The cops are only bad when they're keeping us from speaking. I mean, when I forget the exact quote, but it was something like Clem set the mask on fire, and then of course, like, the Capitol Police put it out because it's a fire. Um, and he's like, they don't like us setting this on fire,
I
but
didn't
they trample
realize that the
this.
police had put out the fire. What happened?
I,
What happened there?
let me see. I think I wrote this down. So Clem then doused a disposable mask in hand sanitizer before lighting it on fire in front of the crowd, some of which threw their own masks down for kindling. Capitol Security,
For kindling.
Capitol Security, which was monitoring the entire event, quickly came over to extinguish the small fire. They don't like us burning masks, Clem said. We don't like it when they trample on our freedoms.
So it would be painfully obvious to kind of point out the performative nature of this, as all protest is performative, certainly.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, I think there's some good artifacts here for to really kind of sink your teeth into, wow, what's going on here is so interesting. But it's also obviously, really dangerous.
Yeah.
And it's going to result in people dying. People will get sick and die because of this protest, because of these civil disobedience actions. And that brought to my mind the fact that, some of these GOP leaders are giving each other COVID, catching it at their churches and things like that. One guy died,
Representative Edwards.
died. Yeah, exactly. Who, I'm sorry again.
Yeah. Representative Edwards.
Right. Died. Catching it, probably less than Kevin Bacon separated from Scott Clem. Right. And Wyoming really is a small town.
Yeah.
Now we have learned that Wyoming truly is a small town, because all of the anti-maskers are giving each other COVID.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's wild to me because I think for a long time the rhetoric has been like, people will be anti-mask until it happens to them or it happens to someone they love, and then they'll come to their senses and they'll see the truth of their ways. And like that obviously hasn't happened for Clem. Like his own colleague and congregant, like, and I'm assuming friends. Like I'm assuming if you're in the legislature together and in church together, that you're also friends. He died of it like the day before the election.
That blows my mind. That should actually blow everybody's mind. Like, and that this would happen in the wake of that.
Yeah.
There's probably some Freudian / Lacanian / more contemporary psychological psychoanalytic theory that can explain Scott Clem having this rally in the wake of his
Yeah.
friend dying at his
Yeah.
from, you know,
Yeah.
probably Kevin Bacon or less
Yeah.
separated from him. There is probably some kind of
Yeah.
psychological explanation, a
Yeah.
strange projection, and again, a kind of distortion or a kind of dissonant sort of response, which I feel like is what we see. And I like to say, to really oversimplify things, that Wyoming is a settler capitalist state, and the ordinary people here,
Mm-hmm.
including people who are not part of great privilege,
Yeah.
will identify with a lot of these values and practices and the way they're articulated, and they will bite on the narrative so easily. And I really feel like, to a large extent, that is what is happening here. But I want to say, because I pointed this out before, and we showed Michael's photo,
Mm-hmm.
um, and you said you thought 250 people,
Yeah.
and I'm looking at that photo, and that was when what he said, the size seemed at
Yeah.
the most of the
Yeah.
time. And I just want to say that I can tell you, I can name 5 demonstrations in
Mm-hmm.
the last 4 years in Wyoming
Mm-hmm.
that were bigger
Yeah.
than that demonstration,
Yeah.
including demonstrations in Laramie,
Mm-hmm.
and not the capital city.
Yeah.
And this was slated to be a statewide thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, would you say that its bark is louder than its bite, or what would you say about the
Yeah.
size of this?
I think so. I mean, it's always tempting to say it's smaller than it is, but I think in this case it is in fact that there are a few very loud voices in the room, and they all kind of travel in the same circles, and they all are on the same message boards, and they're all kind of echo chambering each other. And the part that worries me is that I think in Wyoming's case, there is in fact like a silent majority. Like there's a lot of quote unquote moderate Republicans who don't think like Scott Clem does. But I'm not sure that if Scott Clem were to be the candidate for governor, they would not just hold their nose and vote for him anyway because he has an R next to his name. And so that's where the rhetoric kind of worries me. Like, in addition to just the fact that they're advocating that people die, like, in addition to just the general idea that they think we shouldn't have masks and they think we shouldn't have health orders, and they think that herd immunity means that all the weak people just die off and then all the healthy people are left. The thing that worries me is that I don't see enough other people standing up against them. I don't see enough other people from their own party, from their own communities, standing up against this rhetoric. There's a lot of people who like don't want to make waves, or there's a lot of people who, just want to kind of go along to get along. And I don't see a lot of, like Mr. Smith goes to Washington style grand moral stands happening against what they're saying.
Yeah, and I want to go, but I want to
Yeah.
actually push that maybe a tiny step further
Yeah.
too. One of the chairs, or one of the, there was
Frank Ethorn was
yeah,
there.
and spoke.
Yeah.
And initially was that who said initially that they were just there to monitor it or to watch it or something? I
I
can't
think
remember
it was
because,
someone else.
by the way, Nick Reynolds,
Yeah.
you rock the house,
Yeah,
because
Nick,
we
you have the
are
best
able
Twitter.
to, like, much of the narrative that we're drawing
Yeah.
from here is your live tweeting of the event. So
Yeah.
sorry, wanted to footnote,
No.
shout out to Nick.
Yes.
And then, and
Yeah.
so
I
there were
think it
one or
was-
two main like party officials
Yeah,
there, and
yeah,
they spoke.
Yeah.
So
I think
it was a Republican Party event.
Yeah, I think the director of the GOP, which just the way that our parties are created, the chair and the director are two different people. So for like the kind of party business, the chair is in charge, and then for things like setting up the caucus or whatever, the director is in charge. And so I think it was the director who said something along the lines of like, "Oh, we're just here to monitor."
But ended up giving a speech.
I think so.
I think so too.
Either she did or Ethorn did. One of them did.
I feel like because let's see what happens and where people orient themselves around this. As it was billed as an unofficial
Yeah.
event or billed as
Yeah.
a Scott Clem event,
Yeah.
but it really was a who's who
Yeah.
of Republican Party leadership at the
Hmm.
event. The Republican Party itself, the state Republican Party itself, has
Yeah.
repeatedly protested any kind of restrictions, any kind of public safety protocols.
Hmm.
And while I don't know that the party would feel comfortable endorsing the call for civil disobedience for obvious reasons,
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard to figure out what membrane separates what Clem is
Yeah.
doing from what the rest from the official party line.
Yeah. No, it is. And I mean, I think we've been seeing for the past year, there's been a lot of disruption within the Republican Party. There's the whole thing where they censured the woman behind the Cowgirl Run Fund because she dared to think that women should just be in office no matter what party they're from. There was a lot of hubbub with the Natrona County Republicans, and there was that whole changing of the rules at their state convention. And there's all those like YO Rhino posters going up all over town and all that kind of stuff. Like there's a lot of dissension in the ranks. But that seems to not matter come election day. And that's the part that's kind of curious to me, is that there are people who will speak out about them, but then they fall back in line on voting day. And I don't know if that means that they're just more loyal to the party than they are to other things, or if they're just pragmatic, or I don't know kind of what's behind that. But
so this was, among other things, an anti-governor rally.
Yeah.
And so you know, we talk about the state of the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about the vitriol that's been directed at this? You know, I mean, 2 years ago, I would have said we have a conservative Republican governor.
Yeah.
And now, you know, it's almost as if the party itself has shifted the narrative, and this guy seems now to be a moderate Republican.
Yeah.
But really not a moderate Republican. So what's going on here?
I think honestly, one of the problems is that this far right element needs an enemy. They need someone that they can blame, and they need someone that they can say is in charge of all their woes. And much as I would prefer it's not the case, like the Democrats don't really fit that bill in Wyoming. Like we're getting stronger as a party, but like it's not like you can lay any of this on us. You know, it's not like there are enough Democrats in the legislature.
Well, I'm doing my best to take one for the team, as you've seen
Yes.
on social media lately.
Yeah.
I have actually become everything that's wrong.
Yeah. Thank you for becoming our lightning rod of hate.
I'm doing my best to open that Overton window for you. Yeah.
Thank you. And so, you know, they can't blame Democrats for this. They can't say that, you know, this is a Democratic thing, or that this is, you know, the Democrats are influencing us. Like, where is that the case? And so they start eating their own. They have to create a new enemy out of what they see as the person who is still more to the left than they are, which in this case is a fairly conservative governor. And now in their version of the Overton window, he is Bernie Sanders, basically, because he has very moderate, like I cannot stress how moderate our health orders are compared to what other states have had and what other countries who have successfully overcome COVID for the time being have done. And so he has to become kind of this new figurehead for everything that is wrong and everything that makes them unhappy. And, you know, there's a very large strain, I think, in Wyoming, where like the Wyoming I grew up in, and this is probably like rose glasses nostalgia, but, you know, I grew up in a Wyoming where freedom and responsibility went hand in hand, where yes, there was a very strong libertarian streak, but also like you still took care of your neighbor and you still understood kind of the social contract, and you were still willing to do your part to make Wyoming better. And I think that responsibility part has been lost over, you know, the last decade or so, where now it's not freedom comes with responsibility, it's freedom from responsibility. It's freedom and freedom from responsibility. And
yeah, what if that has something to do with as the, kind of carbon curtain has started to come down,
Hmm.
credit Jeff Lockwood's book, Behind the Carbon Curtain. As that has started to come down, as the veneer has started to come down,
Hmm.
as mines are closing,
Yeah.
as the market is shifting, and we're in this huge trouble.
Yeah.
And you have, a lot of these coal bosses, a lot of these big, these big mines and other functions, closing up shop, declaring bankruptcy, getting out of their environmental responsibilities, getting out
Hmm.
of their responsibilities to their workers,
Yeah.
abandoning their, there's a bunch of different parts of the social contract,
Yeah.
right, that are
Yeah.
collapsing.
Yeah.
And so, in the face of all of these other parts of the social contract in Wyoming collapsing, the notion of collective
Yeah.
responsibility can't sustain itself,
Yeah.
because if I take the social contract seriously, then there's a lot of things going on here that would need to change.
Yeah.
And so it's easier to and more, and because people for whatever reason become very pliable
Hmm.
ideologically, it's easier to just abandon that
Yeah.
and to take this notion of radical responsibility, that if other parties were taking it, if the other
Yeah.
side was taking any of that and just saying, well, we don't have to comply with something that we don't like,
Hmm.
then that would be used as evidence of our depravity.
Yeah. 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 Well, and I think, I mean, I read probably too much dystopian fiction and watch probably too much dystopian media, but there's a strain, like there's a character in every, zombie film who is the person who will hide the fact that they've been bitten by zombies so that they can, live on as long as they can and infect as many people as they can, as long as they are okay temporarily. And I think that's the kind of mindset that a lot of these figures have, of as long as I can, I'm going to live as long as I can, I'm going to use up as many resources as I can, and I'm not going to care about the effect that that might have on other people. And there's all like that, there's that person in every zombie film, and then like the nice safe house falls and all things are bad. And I think that like they don't really believe in an end of the world scenario where like we're all taking care of each other. Like, if all the houses on my block lose their power, we're checking on each other. We are, going to each other's houses, seeing if anyone has batteries, seeing if everyone has candles. Like that is my version of the end of the world, where like you're checking on everyone and you're sharing resources. And their end of the world is I'm going to hole up in my house, and or I'm going to take the things from everyone else's houses that I might need for as long as the power is out.
Right,
And
right.
I just,
I think they would say that they've got their churches, and I
yeah,
mean, or some of them would say that. I mean, it's
yeah,
again kind of a mixed, I think a
hmm,
kind of a mixed message. They have their, I think they still have a sense of
yeah,
community, but the interesting thing is to see how many different parts or peripheries of those communities get cast aside and cast aside and cast aside, so
yeah,
that there are more and more instances of, I don't have to care about these people. These are
hmm,
not people I have to care about. These are not people I have to care about. I'll care about my own kind.
hmm,
And it becomes, tribal in the anthropological sense of kind of keeping, with our very narrow picture of
yeah,
our own people. It also, to me, reflects what I have said on social media, which is that the Wyoming Republican Party wants to turn Wyoming into a big company town. Everything will be privatized. They want to privatize the roads. They want to privatize the towns. They want
yeah,
literally to
yeah,
privatize the towns,
yeah,
and everything privatized. And then everything can be covered by the company,
hmm,
and whatever that company is, I
yeah,
guess as will be the last state mining coal on the planet, or
yeah,
something like that. And, and there will be this sense of, well, everything that you do, if you're going to be here, everything you do is owned, and we
hmm,
don't owe you anything. We don't
yeah,
owe you anything at all. And that, I think, to me, is the ultimate vision.
hmm,
It is really the ultimate libertarian vision,
hmm,
I think. But it's not libertarian as in, frolicking, happy around in the clover,
Yeah.
but more, a kind of a crypto fascist libertarianism where there's no
Yeah.
services and nothing except what the boss gives you.
Yeah.
And so I'm sorry if that sounds a little hyperbolic, but you went off on dystopian fiction, so I
Yeah.
thought it
Yeah.
was
No,
okay
it's only fair.
if I gave my version of what I
Yeah.
think a dystopian novel about
Yeah.
Wyoming in 20 years, is it maybe is going to look like.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think honestly, in the upcoming years, we're going to probably see towns either get privatized or die. Um, we have, I think 70% of our towns in Wyoming are less than 1,000 people. And if we are cutting state budgets and if we're cutting education and we're cutting all these things that are the lifeblood of these towns are going to either die or a company is going to buy them up. Like those are the two options at that point. Sundance became technically the first town to defund the police because they were literally out of funds. Enough people retired and enough people were, you know, having budget cuts that they just lumped it all together. And so I think that we're going to see that happening more and more. And, our farming communities, I can be a farmer because my spouse works in the schools and has health insurance, or I can be a farmer because my spouse works for the state government and has an office downtown. The way of life that the far right is kind of using as this ethos and as this kind of model for Wyoming, this small town values that we're always talking about, only exists if we have public funding. I think it was Nate Martin's fairly recent article that basically pointed out that we've all been welfare queens for our entire lives, that the reason that we have the lifestyles that we are used to is that we have been funded by the oil and gas industry for the past 30, 40, however many years. And so the people that are mad at me because I think that children should have an education are also at least should be also mad at themselves because they haven't had to pay a tax for their entire life. The only time I've paid state income tax is when I lived in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
When I lived in the liberal, the liberal city on the hill or whatever, that's when I actually had to pay my fair share of what I was using in that town. And I've never had to do that in Wyoming. And we have billionaires and millionaires moving here because they don't have to.
Mm-hmm. And companies being incorporated
and companies
here,
being incorporated, and we're going to become a Bitcoin
Cheyenne
tax-free
is
state.
Delaware, basically.
Yeah. There's one house in Cheyenne where 1,000 companies are incorporated from.
Right. And and it's one of the other parts of this is interesting too, because I've talked to some of our electeds who are into the cryptocurrency, the recruitment of cryptocurrency companies and stuff, and I think that the thinking is I think along for some folks is that if we attract some tech companies and if we attract some of the kinds of businesses and entrepreneurial class that is likely to want to cash in on some of these new technologies and cryptocurrency and such, that may change the landscape, the political demographic and the political landscape and the political ideological kind of spectrum a little bit. And I don't think that's not an unreasonable argument to make. I think that it's going to be interesting to see because not every business that you can attract here is going to be one that you can use seasonal, temporary 1099 independent contractor kind of work to do. And the moment that you attract a large working base that is not independent contractor based, those politics start going to the left. Which is not to say that the contractors are not to the left, but that that life, as you know and as I know, is very much designed and implemented in a way that depoliticizes you and makes you kind of be like, well, I have to grab what I can. I have to grab the work I can, which is the way that they've kept the oil industry going without unionization here for decades, which is to attract these young oil workers, give them a wad of cash and then say you're on your own. We'll see you next year.
Yeah.
And that is the preferred way, and that's how ranching employment
Yeah.
largely works as well in
Hmm.
Wyoming. So the two big industries here have largely been sustained with temporary labor.
Yeah.
And once you change that, then then the politics, I think,
Yeah.
changes. Once the
Yeah.
laborer becomes a more permanent settlement,
Hmm.
then that changes the politics and tends to start to elect more liberal and
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
progressive
Yeah.
leaders.
Yeah. And I think that tech is actually a pretty good answer for us, partly just because one of the things tech needs is a lot of large open cold spaces for servers. And we got that aplenty. I think we need to be careful in how we're doing it. Like, for example, I definitely support cryptocurrency, but I think the legislation we just passed was not fantastic because it basically again opens us up to be a pass-through state. The one of the first news articles I read about it, this I forget her name, but she helped kind of write the legislation.
Mm-hmm.
She's a tech entrepreneur in Cheyenne, and she said something along the lines of like, well, yes, we can have our base in Cheyenne, and then our workers can come from anywhere in Wyoming. It's remote, so it can be from anywhere in Wyoming. And the first thought I had was that means it can be from anywhere in the world. That means it can be from anywhere in America. That means that there's no guarantee that we are employing Wyomingites in this. There's no
Mm-hmm.
guarantee that this money is being made by and spent by Wyomingites in Wyoming's economy.
Well,
And
I hope that we can. I actually hope that we can have maybe Chris Rothfuss
yeah,
or someone on the show at some point soon, so that we can talk a little bit
yeah,
more
yeah. Because I'm
about
definitely
that.
not an expert.
Because I think it's a conversation worth
Oh
having.
yeah,
I've also had some really good conversations with Jeff Lockwood and Eric Movar, both who independently of each other sort of started envisioning what they thought might look like a Wyoming with 300,000 people in it or
yeah,
350,000 people in it,
yeah.
and maybe going towards tourism and
Hmm.
service industries and other types of things like that. And I feel like, so I mean, there's no shortage of good
Yeah.
ideas, right? But a lot of those good ideas are ones that would actually turn the state in a direction that
Hmm.
I think some of the old guard would not be really fond of,
Yeah.
because it would definitely be, I think that a small Wyoming has the potential to be more progressive than the Wyoming as it is now,
Hmm.
if particular decisions are made. And there is, again, this intimacy to these decisions, because our leaders are really good at communicating with each other and getting each other sick and dying, as well as dialoguing with
Hmm.
people for better or worse. And
Hmm.
so I think that almost anything could go. We've gotten far off track of the original
Yes,
protest, but
sorry.
that's okay. But I think all of these things contextualize
Hmm.
what happened yesterday, which was 250 people or so, from around the state gathered in Cheyenne, to vilify and kind of ritualistically burn, this sense of public responsibility.
Hmm.
And so I think it really
Yeah.
does have to do with the whole. You
Yeah.
have to, I think, understand the whole history. It's like, if you liked what happened to Kansas under Brownback et
Yeah.
al., you'll love
Yeah.
what could potentially happen to Wyoming. And
Kansas 2
someone,
Electric Boogaloo.
or maybe you will write our version of What's the Matter with Wyoming.
Yeah. So much. I mean, well, it's honestly the number of times I've been told to go back to Colorado or go back to California or go back to insert liberal place here is astounding. um, because, on paper at least, I am the Wyoming story. I'm fifth generation Wyoming. I grew up on a family ranch. Um, my dad told me stories about how to keep myself safe from mountain lions when I was 5, and that probably messed me up. But
Nice one, Dad.
I mean, I haven't had to use it yet, so there's still time for me to find out that was very useful. Um, but like my family story is the story. My dad's family came here from the East Coast, and we bought up some land, and my great grandfather gave a parcel of land to each of his sons as they got married. And my grandfather's a World War II veteran who bought our ranch with his earnings from World War II, and we've worked for 60 years to keep it sustainable. Like, we are that hard scrabble Wyoming story. And because I espouse things that are different from what other people espouse, they automatically assume I'm not from here. They automatically assume that I don't understand what it's like to be a Wyomingite, or that my politics mean that I have to move somewhere else. And like, my response is usually like, I was here first.
If only people in your generation were actually coming.
Yeah.
But wouldn't you say that many of your peers,
yeah,
many of the folks that you went to high school with in Cheyenne, are not here anymore?
yeah, no, I'm only half joking when I say that I did the usual thing, which is to go to the University of Wyoming and then leave. And then I did the unusual thing of coming back. I mean, we've been talking about brain drain since my father was in college. We've been talking about that for decades, and then not really done anything to change it. And honestly, right now, under our current system, it doesn't necessarily help us to change it, because that actually costs us more money.
Mm-hmm.
Every family.
We've been doing brain drain, and yesterday was the result.
And yesterday was
of brain drain.
Brain drain.
Yesterday was the living manifestation of brain drain in Wyoming. 250 people in Cheyenne, hating on cops and burning masks.
And so I mean, most of my generation doesn't live here anymore. Most of my generation has moved away, all over the country. I have friends, all over right now. And part of it is because it is made hard for us to want to be here. It is made hard for us to think that this is a good place to come back and feel safe and feel like, we can raise our families here and have them not get twisted up by this really weird rhetoric. A lot of my friends are having kids, and they're talking about, I don't know if this is a good place to raise them anymore. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I love Wyoming. I love it very, very much. I don't want to have to leave here. But, if there is, God forbid, a Governor Clem or Governor Bouchard someday, like, I don't know that I could stay. I don't know that this is a place that I could feel okay in.
Or Governor Hageman.
Yeah. Like there are a lot of possibilities here.
There are a lot of really, really scary scenarios
where it's just, and like, trying to attract someone. I have friends who, are struggling under gigantic rent payments in other states. And I'm like, Wyoming's cheaper. And they're like, but then it's Wyoming. And I say, true.
Well, no, I mean, we've got people moving out of our, of our project because they can't get health insurance here. And, when you talk to elected officials and they say, you're right, you should move to Colorado if that's really a concern. And, and I think that, I forgot exactly what I was going to say just now, but that I think one of the outcomes here, speaking of public health and speaking of feeling safe, is that, I would just say that Scott Clem issued a call yesterday to violate public health protocols.
Yes.
He did. That's a call to spread COVID. And first of all, I at the risk of stating the obvious, that seems morally spurious. But for a pastor, the other part of that is, though, that that folks should be careful. I mean, we need to keep being careful. So I'm kind of shifting now to practical advice about this, is that people are going to openly violate public safety protocols in public as a result of this. People have been already. This will accelerate that. We are in a relatively good place in terms of potentially eventually kind of pushing back against this and getting, being able to be healthy in public again. And so for this to happen is just, people just need to watch out. And,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, now people will not be frequenting businesses and things like that because they are going to want to avoid followers of Scott Clem,
Yeah.
who's who are actualizing themselves and actualizing their potential as public citizens and stakeholders and advocates of democracy by going out and coughing in public. Basically, this is a big cough in public, and so that makes it more dangerous to live here. It absolutely makes it more dangerous to occupy public spaces here, and that sucks. But be careful, folks. I'm still trying to be optimistic about the direction that we're headed, and see this as a hiccup. But I think that it suggests something that we should, that should have the practical effect of us not getting too careless. Because there's not just people out there being careless now. There are now people out there proactively being careless, which is, I think, different.
There's some malicious intent happening as opposed to just not worrying as much. But honestly, I mean, it's not like I ever really went out much, but I'm basically treating it again like it's last March, like it was when we first started hearing about this and we were on lockdown and all that kind of stuff. And I know that is a privilege I have because I don't work retail. I don't have a job that puts me public facing. And I just want us to think about the people who do. One of Scott Clem's things that he said, and one of everyone else's favorite things is like, well, if you don't feel safe, then you just go home or you stay home. And that's not an option for most of us. That's not an option for most of the people who are most at risk by this. Like that. A waiter simultaneously wants you to come in because they need the money, but they also want you to stay home because they don't want to get sick. And they don't have a good way to be able to navigate that. And so we have to be doing our parts to make things safer for them. We have to be doing our parts to make things safer for the people who don't have that choice.
Well, I think it's important to point out that when Jesus was healing the lepers, he actually was trying to tell us that we should spread leprosy as much as we possibly could. And I'm sure that what he said was, I will heal you, but you need to then immediately go get infected again.
I'm an English major, but I'm very bad at close reading sometimes. I probably missed that part.
Yeah, you're missing out on Scott Clem's biblical hermeneutics. And so I'm pretty sure that it was spread leprosy, not cure leprosy was the thing here. Hey, it's been great having you on today, Lindsey Hanlon. And I'm Matt Stannard, and we will be also putting this out on our Solidarity Wyoming podcast. We are at patreon.com/solidarityhouse, but let's hear your sites and things, places you would like people to go to learn more about you and to follow your work and support your work.
Sure. I have a blog at thefeministlipstick.com, and again, that's LIPSTIQUE, because I don't like to give myself good names that are easy for people to find. I also TikTok under that same name. So again, The Feminist Lipstick, and I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/thefeministlipstick. So come check me out.
Once you get this lipstick thing down, then it's really easy. We will share all of those links all over the place as well. Really encourage people to support Lindsey's work on the Patreon. And anything exciting coming up?
So I am going to start doing a set of posts on basically kind of how to start being into makeup if you have not been into makeup before. If you're hypothetically a woman in her 30s who grew up thinking that makeup was kind of the oppressive gender norm BS, and you are starting to slowly embrace the feminine side as well as the masculine side, and if you're kind of starting to figure out how that works for you, I'll be starting to do a series of videos on that real soon.
Fantastic. And we look forward to having you back to talk more shit. And also wanted to let people know for our part that our interview on Marxism and transgender liberation with Kelly Potter, who is a philosophy professor, a communist, and a trans activist, is going to be dropping this week
Awesome.
on our both our Patreon and our Podbean, our Spotify, as well as Apple. So that's going to come out this week. We have another, and then that will be followed by another interview with a trans Marxist activist, Dominique. So we've got a lot of stuff coming out on the kind of far left of the fringe of what we do over the next week. So we'll be talking about that. We will have more of these conversations, and we will continue to follow this just this very strange, convoluted route of Wyoming politics. Thanks everybody for watching and listening. And thanks again, Lindsey. It's been great having you.
Thanks for having me.